The night they burned Agnes Holloway's house down, the whole village stood and watched. Not in horror. In satisfaction, 3 children had gone missing in 6 weeks. Fear had turned the village of Dunmore into something it had never officially called itself, but had always, in moments like this, been capable of becoming. And Agnes, who lived alone at the edge of the woods, who spoke to no one, who kept strange hours and stranger herbs, had been the answer that fear needed. Nobody had any evidence. They didn't require any. The mob came at 11 at night. They found her house empty. Some of them took that as proof she had fled. Others took it as proof of something darker. Either way, they lit the fire. Agnes's home burned for 2 hours. Her garden burned. Her small collection of books burned. 20 years of a quiet, careful life reduced to ash while the village watched, and the village chief, Arthur Pell, stood at the front of the crowd with his arms folded and said nothing to stop it. 3 days later, the missing children were found. They were alive, and the place they were found, the place they had been hidden, protected, fed, and kept safe for 6 weeks, was a cellar beneath the ruins of Agnes Holloway's burned house. She had known they were in danger. She had hidden them herself. And the man who had led the mob that burned her house, the man whose idea it had been, was the reason they had needed hiding in the first place. This is the story of Agnes Holloway, and it is one of the most important stories I have ever told. Before we go any further, like this video right now, please. If this story is already hitting, that like button matters so much more than you think. Subscribe if you haven't. It's free. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Now let me tell you about Agnes. Agnes Holloway was 58 years old and had lived in Dunmore her whole life. She had been born there. Her parents had been born there. She had grown up on the same land where her house now stood, at the very edge of where the village ended and the woods began, which had always told you something about where the village had placed her, even before she became someone they talked about. She had never married. This was the first thing Dunmore held against her. In a village where a woman's story was expected to move through the stages of daughter, wife, mother, grandmother, Agnes had remained stubbornly singular. She had her garden. She had her books. She had the small income from selling dried herbs to people who needed them, and more of them needed them than were willing to admit it publicly, which was something Dunmore also held against her, in the particular way communities hold things against people who provide services they need but can't celebrate. She was strange, they said, kept to herself, talked to her plants, was seen sometimes in the woods at odd hours, which was explained by the fact that many medicinal plants grew best in the forest margins at dawn and dusk, but which Dunmore preferred to interpret differently. The children liked her. That was worth saying, because children are often more honest in their instincts than adults give them credit for. The children of Dunmore came to Agnes's garden regularly. She let them pick berries. She knew all their names. She had a way of talking to them that treated them as full human beings rather than small inconveniences. Their parents tolerated this because Agnes's remedies worked and because the children seemed happy. But tolerance is not the same as acceptance, and Dunmore had always drawn that line very carefully around Agnes Holloway. The village chief, Arthur Pell, was a different kind of person entirely, 55 years old, broad and confident, the son of the previous chief and the heir apparent to everything Dunmore valued: land, authority, the specific respect that accumulates when a family has been important in one place for long enough that importance starts to feel like a natural law. Arthur was charismatic in the way that dangerous people sometimes are. He told good stories. He remembered people's names. He showed up at funerals and harvests and disputes and always managed to be the person who resolved things, which meant he was also always the person who defined what resolution looked like. He had 2 sons and a daughter and a wife named Margaret, who smiled in public with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that smiling was safer than the alternative. Dunmore trusted Arthur Pell completely. Dunmore had built its sense of safety around Arthur Pell's authority for 20 years. Dunmore was wrong. The disappearances started in early autumn. First was a boy named Peter Marsh, 8 years old, who didn't come home from school one Thursday. Then a girl named Lucy Grant, 7, who was seen playing near the market on a Saturday and simply wasn't there when her mother came to collect her an hour later. Then another boy, Daniel Wells, also 8, who went missing from his own back garden on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 children. 6 weeks. No explanation. Dunmore was a small place, the kind of place where nothing like this had ever happened. The fear that descended was the specific kind that comes when the world stops behaving according to the rules you built your sense of safety on. Potcrants stopped letting children outside. Doors were locked at dusk for the first times in memory. The constable, a young man named Officer James Reed, who had been in his position for 2 years and had never dealt with anything more serious than a stolen fence post, was conducting searches that produced nothing. And into that fear, because fear always requires somewhere to point, came the murmuring about Agnes. It started small. A comment at the market, a question asked in the way questions are sometimes asked when the person asking already has an answer in mind. She's always been strange, hasn't she? She's always been in those woods. She knows something, I'd wager. Arthur Pell did not start the murmuring. He was more careful than that, but he encouraged it. In small ways, in the specific way of a man who knew how to shape a crowd's direction without appearing to lead it. A word here, a raised eyebrow there, the silence that said more than agreement when someone made an accusation. There was a reason Arthur wanted Agnes discredited. The reason was sitting in a cellar beneath her house. Agnes had known about Arthur Pell for 3 years. Not everything, but enough. She had seen things in the woods that she wasn't supposed to see. She was often there at hours when no one expected her, which had always been misread as evidence of something sinister, and was actually just evidence of insomnia and a love of early light. She had seen Arthur meeting people she didn't recognize. She had heard conversations she wasn't meant to hear. She had spent 2 years trying to understand what she was looking at. By the time Peter Marsh disappeared, she understood enough. The children had not been taken by a stranger. They had been taken as leverage, by people connected to Arthur Pell, as part of a scheme involving land, money, and the specific cruelty of people who move children like chess pieces. Agnes didn't go to Officer Reed. She had tried that route the year before, bringing him her observations about Arthur's nighttime meetings, and he had looked at her with the expression he reserved for village eccentrics and suggested she might benefit from more sleep. She didn't go to Arthur. Obviously. She did the only thing left to her. She found the children herself. It took her 4 days. She knew the woods. She knew the geography of the land around Dunmore in a way that nobody else did because she had been walking it alone for 30 years. She found them in a disused storage building 2 miles north of the village, frightened but physically unharmed, left with enough food to survive. She brought them back in the dark, not to their homes, because she didn't yet know who could be trusted, didn't know how far Arthur's network extended, and knew that returning them publicly would require explaining how she found them, which would expose everything she knew before she had any way to protect that knowledge. She brought them to her cellar. She fed them. She told they were safe and that she was going to fix this, and that they needed to trust her for a little while longer. They trusted her. They had always trusted her. She was the woman who knew their names and let them pick berries. Agnes then did something that showed exactly how clearly she understood her own situation. She wrote everything down, what she had seen, what she had heard, what she believed Arthur Pell had done, and why, in 3 separate copies. She gave one to her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Clara Thomas, who had been quietly kind to Agnes for 30 years. She mailed one to the regional constabulary office 4 towns away. She kept one hidden in her house, then she waited. She needed the regional constabulary to act before Arthur realized what she had. She had 3 days, she estimated. She had 2. The mob formed on a Wednesday evening. Arthur had gotten word, through the network he had, that Agnes was asking questions. that she had been seen near the northern storage building, that she knew something. He moved fast. He was practiced at moving fast, in ways that looked like community concern rather than self-interest. By 8 o'clock, he had visited 6 homes. By 9, he had spoken at the impromptu gathering outside the church. He didn't accuse Agnes directly. He was too careful for that. He simply asked questions. Has anyone else noticed that she's always in those woods? Has anyone thought about why she would know the places those children might have gone? Has anyone ever really looked at what she keeps in that garden of hers? He let the village do the rest. By 11, there were 40 people outside Agnes's house with torches. Agnes heard them coming. She went to the cellar. The children were asleep. She looked at them for a moment. Peter with his arm curled under his head. Lucy with her knees pulled up. Daniel flat on his back with the complete abandon of a child who has decided the adult with him is trustworthy. She covered them more carefully. She left water and food within reach. She left a note, in simple words, for children who could read, that said, "Stay here. Stay quiet. I will come back. You are safe." She locked the cellar from the outside with a lock that could only be opened from the outside, which meant the children were secure, which meant they couldn't be found by anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Then she went upstairs. She stood in her kitchen while the mob came through her gate. They did not find her hiding. They found her standing at her kitchen table, her hands folded, her face quiet, watching them come through the window. That stillness unnerved some of them. Those who were unnerved stayed toward the back. Agnes was taken out of her own house by people she had known her whole life. Her garden was destroyed. Her books were thrown out. And then the fire was lit while she stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands held by 2 men she had known since they were boys, watching her life burn. She did not scream. She did not beg. She looked for Officer Reed in the crowd. She found him at the edge, watching with an expression she couldn't read. "My neighbor," she said. "Mrs. Thomas. Ask her what I gave her. Ask her, before it's too late." Reed looked at her, then looked at Arthur, who was standing at the front, arms folded, watching the fire with the expression of a man who has resolved a problem. Reed looked back at Agnes. He took out his notebook. "Like this video right now. If this story is pulling you in, that like button is how more people find it. Hit it. Subscribe if you haven't. And comment below, where are you watching from?" Now back to what happened next. Mrs. Clara Thomas answered the door at 11:30 at night in her dressing gown, and she looked at Officer Reed with the expression of someone who had been expecting a knock for 2 days and was relieved it had finally come. She gave him the envelope Agnes had left with her. She also told him what Agnes had told her. All of it. Reed read the document by the light of his torch on Mrs. Thomas's front step. He read it twice. His face went very still in the way faces go still when the ground has shifted. He had, in his 2 years as Dunmore's constable, received exactly 1 piece of correspondence from Agnes Holloway the previous year, which he had filed under eccentric villager concerns and not followed up on. He had spent the intervening year being wrong about that decision. He called for backup from the regional constabulary at midnight. By 6 in the morning, while the embers of Agnes's house were still warm, 2 officers from the regional force were at the ruins with Agnes herself, who had been released from the 2 men's grip at some point during the night when the excitement ebbed, and nobody was quite sure what to do with her. The cellar was opened. The children walked out into the early morning light, squinting and thin and entirely, completely alive. Peter Marsh walked out first. He looked around at the gathered faces. Then he looked at Agnes, who was standing to the side, covered in ash from the night before. He walked directly to her and held her hand. That image, a small boy choosing, instinctively, to stand next to the woman the village had just tried to destroy, was witnessed by 30 people, including Officer Reed, including Mrs. Thomas, including 3 people whose names Agnes had written in her document. It was also witnessed by Arthur Pell, who had come to the ruins at dawn because powerful men always come to assess their own damage. He saw the children. He saw Agnes. He saw Officer Reed and the 2 unfamiliar officers from the regional force. He turned to leave. They stopped him at the gate. Arthur Pell was arrested that morning. The full investigation took months. These things always do, and what it uncovered was the specific, patient, organized cruelty of a man who had used his community's trust as cover for a decade's worth of schemes involving land deals, false agreements, and the leveraging of families' vulnerabilities against them. The children had been taken to pressure their fathers. 3 men who had land that Arthur wanted, who had refused to sell, who had been about to take their refusals to a regional court. With their children missing, 2 of the 3 had been on the verge of signing anything put in front of them. Agnes had stopped it. She had stopped it by doing the thing she always did: paying careful attention, taking things seriously, working quietly and without announcement in the direction of what was right. The charges against Arthur Pell were significant. He did not come home. What happened to Agnes afterward was both simple and, in its way, remarkable. The village held a meeting. These meetings are always awkward. The accounting of what a community did in its worst moment, the attempt to look at itself clearly. There were apologies. Some of them were genuine. Some were the performed kind. Agnes attended and listened to all of them with the same still attention she had always given everything. She did not tell the village that she forgave them. She was not in the business of offering comfort that hadn't been earned. She did accept the offer of materials to rebuild. The house went up in 4 months, the whole community contributing labor and money in the specific collective guilt of people trying to make a material thing serve as an apology for an immaterial one. It was smaller than the original but had, Mrs. Thomas noted, considerably better windows. Agnes planted her garden again. Peter, Lucy, and Daniel, once recovered and home, came to help. Their parents, standing at the gate watching, found themselves unable to keep the tears from their eyes. Arthur Pell's wife Margaret sent Agnes a letter. It was 1 sentence. "I knew some of it. I should have said something. I am sorry." Agnes wrote back 2 sentences. "You were afraid. I understand afraid." Officer Reed was promoted. He drove to Agnes's new house on his last day in Dunmore before transferring to the regional office and stood at her gate and said, "I should have listened to you last year." "Yes," Agnes said, "but you listened when it mattered. That counts." He seemed genuinely uncertain whether it did. Agnes didn't resolve that uncertainty for him because she thought sitting with it was probably what he needed. She went back inside. The kettle was on. Mrs. Thomas was coming for tea. The woods at the edge of the property were catching the afternoon light in the particular way they did in autumn, golden and slightly melancholy, and extraordinarily beautiful. Agnes looked at them for a moment, then she went inside.